Welcome again to Boomerang Academy. Thank you for joining us today where we are talking about our Zapier integration. So today we're talking about Bloomerang plus Zapier, automating donations from PayPal to Bloomerang. Joining us today is Jesse Gilchrist, our friends from Sidekick Solutions, who helped build the Zapier integration with Bloomerang. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jesse.
Thanks, Diana. So, I'm really excited to be here. I love PayPal. I love Bloomerang. I think there's a lot we can do. So I think I'm excited to get started. Diana, are we ready to get going here?
Yes, I know we have a lot of great content to cover today, so go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. So you guys probably noticed I'm going to keep my webcam off or my video off simply because I'm going to be sharing my screen for the majority of the presentation. And I want to make sure you can see my screen as we go through and demo how you can connect PayPal and Bloomerang using Zapier. So I work for Sidekick Solutions, and we're a Bloomerang partner that specializes in system automations for Bloomerang. We've been using Bloomerang since 2013, and we're most recently part of the Bloomerang team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app. So that is going to be a key component of today's webinar. So the goal of our webinar today is to show how a Bloomerang integration with PayPal using Zapier can support your fundraising efforts by reducing the time spent performing data entry and ensure you have consistency across how donations are being coded in Bloomerang. So first off, we're going to introduce Bloomerang and Zapier, how they work together, and why Zapier integrations can be a key feature of your Bloomerang system and your fundraising strategy. And then we're going to explore and demonstrate how you can use the Bloomerang Zapier app to sync donations from PayPal to Bloomerang, and also how you can dynamically code the fund, campaign, and/or appeal in Bloomerang as well. So we have demos throughout the webinar to show you how to set these up for your organization. And as Diana mentioned, feel free to submit any questions during the presentation. We've got a question break kind of bucketed right in the middle, and then we should have plenty of time at the end for more questions as well. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So first, we want to do a quick poll to see how many of you are using Zapier, and of that, how many of you are using Zapier with Bloomerang? So let us know if you use Zapier and have Zaps running with Bloomerang, if you use Zapier but not with Bloomerang, if you've never heard of Zapier before, or maybe you've heard of it but have never used it.
Thanks, Jesse. We're going to give a couple more seconds so people can answer. We're also getting some answers in the chat. Thank you for that. And while that poll is up, Jesse, I wonder if you can answer a quick question. If we have customers who are already using Bloomerang and PayPal, anything that we do today would apply to donations moving forward. Is that correct?
Yes. So any automation that's set up in Zapier is essentially a go forward basis. So once you turn your integration on, it syncs data from that point forward. So it wouldn't go back and pull historical transactions from PayPal and sync them to Bloomerang.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And it looks like we have a majority of our attendees today, it's tied at 47% apiece, have either not heard of Zapier before or have heard of Zapier but never used it. We do have 2% who have used Zapier and you're using it with Bloomerang, and 4% who have used Zapier or do use Zapier but not with Bloomerang.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. So since it sounds like almost over 80 or not, almost over 90% of you haven't heard of Zapier or have heard of it but haven't really used it, we want to start by doing a high-level overview of what Zapier is and why we believe this is a key feature and should be part of your Bloomerang system and fundraising strategy. So for those of you that are familiar with Zapier, this may be more of a review for you. So bear with us as we go through these slides. So you might be wondering why we talk about Zapier when this webinar is about Bloomerang and PayPal. It's a fair question, and it really offers an exciting answer. So Zapier is the software that enables Bloomerang to integrate with other applications, expanding your fundraising opportunities. So it's a middleware that sits between your Bloomerang database and other apps like PayPal, helping them talk to each other. At its core, Zapier is automation software. And with Zapier, you can build one integration or many, automating hundreds of tasks around your Bloomerang system within a single platform. So obviously, I'm excited about the Bloomerang Zapier app and being able to integrate, but let's talk about why we find this so exciting. There are three main reasons. First and foremost is that Zapier connects to over 3,000 other applications. So any app in Zapier's directory can be connected to Bloomerang. So if it's on Zapier's list or in their marketplace, it can be integrated with Bloomerang, and that includes PayPal. So I'm just here at zapier.com/apps, and I could search for any app in Zapier's directory. So I could search for Bloomerang and learn more about what integration opportunities Bloomerang offers. I could do the same for PayPal, or I could search for any other app that my organization might be using to see if it's on Zapier's platform. So this marketplace of over 3,000 other apps means that on a single platform, you can integrate Bloomerang with multiple applications. So it's a really great tool to be able to connect to many different apps on a single platform. Now, second, Zapier was designed for anyone to build integrations. You don't need to know how to code to build a Zap. We're going to walk through some builds today so you can get a feel for what that process looks like. And it's really straightforward. And then the last reason we get so excited is that Zapier enables custom integration. So you aren't limited to a one-size-fits-all workflow, mapping, or formatting. You really can build an integration that's perfect for your organization and matches your use case. Now, to start, let's talk about how you connect Bloomerang and PayPal to Zapier. So in order to sync donations from PayPal to Bloomerang, we first need to connect both of these apps to Zapier. So let's start with Bloomerang. Now, if any of you have attended the Bloomerang Academy classes that we've done on any of the other Bloomerang integrations that we've showcased, this is one piece that we haven't actually showcased on a webinar before. And the reason why we're going to show you now how to connect Bloomerang and PayPal to Zapier is because PayPal has a very interesting way that it connects to Zapier. And so we want to make sure we show how to actually connect the databases together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect Bloomerang. So we would go to, once we log into our Zapier account, we would go to the My Apps page. Now, Bloomerang connects to Zapier much in the same way other applications do. So you can see I already have Bloomerang connected, but if I didn't, I could come up here and click Add Connection. And then I just search for the app that I want to connect. So I'd search for Bloomerang, select the Bloomerang app, and it's going to go ahead and show the user that I'm already logged in with through Bloomerang. If I weren't logged in, it would just ask me to provide my username and password for Bloomerang, and then I can just click Grant Access. Or perhaps I'm logged into a different user in Bloomerang than the one I want to connect to Zapier. And if that were the case, I could log out and then log in with a different user. So connecting Bloomerang is that simple. You just search for Bloomerang and then provide your Bloomerang login credentials to connect your Bloomerang database. Now, connecting PayPal is a bit more complicated. So connecting PayPal is really a two-step process. The first step is in Zapier, and the second step is in PayPal. So to start, we actually need to start building a Zap, which is a workflow, using our trigger in PayPal. So I'm going to go to my Zaps page here, and I'm just going to click Make a New Zap. So Zaps in Zapier are workflows, and each Zap starts with a trigger. And a trigger is an event that happens in one application, and it prompts the integration to run. So in this case, our trigger is going to come from PayPal. So I'm just going to search for and select PayPal. Now we are going to select successful sale as our trigger. There are two different successful sale triggers for PayPal. One provides line item support and the other does not. For the demo we're going to do today, we will not be showing how to do it with line item support. So we're just going to choose the standard successful sale trigger. Now, when I click continue, you will see that it's going to give us what's called a webhook URL. And it gives us the option to copy this. So I'm going to go ahead and click copy, and then we're going to talk through what this does. So webhooks are one way that apps can send automated messages or information to another application. To put it as simple as possible, the webhook URL right here that Zapier provided is how PayPal is going to tell Zapier when a donation or payment is made. So every time we have a successful sale or a successful transaction in PayPal, the webhook URL is going to receive a payload of data about the transaction in Zapier. We then are able to use that data to find and create the constituent and create a corresponding donation in Bloomerang. So now that we have our webhook URL, this is where we go to the second step, which is we have to connect this to PayPal. So PayPal has us add this webhook URL to a feature that's called an instant payment notification, or an IPN. An instant payment notification is a PayPal feature that sends data about new payments or transactions from PayPal to our desired webhook. So in this case, it's Zapier. Now, the easiest way to go to the instant payment notification setting in PayPal is to click this little hyperlink down here that says visit your PayPal IPN settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it's going to, because I'm already logged into my PayPal account, it's not going to prompt me to log in. But if I weren't logged in, it would prompt me to log in. If you haven't set up an instant payment notification before, there'll be a button that says choose IPN settings. And then we'll take you to a page that looks similar like this. And you will simply paste your webhook URL into the notification URL field and then elect to receive IPN messages enabled and just click save. Now, an important thing to note is that if you use PayPal donation buttons, the donation button itself provides a feature where you can set a different notification URL. So rather than this one right here, this instant payment notification one, which is a global setting in PayPal, if you set this on specific to each individual donation button, that will override or can override this global setting. So if you use donation buttons, best practice is not to enter any notification URL on the donation button itself, and instead to use this global notification URL that's found in the instant payment notification settings, because this will make sure that every successful sale that comes through through PayPal as your processor makes it to Zapier. So now that we've connected both Bloomerang and PayPal to Zapier, we can go ahead and talk about how you would sync donations. So when syncing donations from PayPal to Bloomerang, there are two primary steps. First, we need to find or create the constituent in Bloomerang, because we have to know which constituent we want to add the donation to. And then we want to create a donation on the timeline of that founder created constituent. So let's hop into Zapier and actually walk through how we would set up this workflow. So I'm going to go back to Zapier here, and I'm going to close out of a couple of tabs. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that Zap that I had started where we pulled in the where we pulled in the webhook URL that we would put into our instant payment notification. And I'm going to name my Zap. We're going to call this PayPal Successful Sale to create donation in Bloomerang. We like to name Zaps in Zapier in a way that matches what it's accomplishing. So what our trigger is, which is a successful sale in PayPal, and then the action we want to take, which is we want to create a donation in Boomerang. Now on this trigger that we set up for PayPal, I'm going to go ahead and click continue and then click test trigger. Anytime you set up a new Zap, you want to test the trigger so that it pulls in a sample record you can use to set up your mapping. So when you're setting up a new PayPal one, it returns essentially a dummy payload of data. You can see we have test city, test account. So it's just dummy information that we can use when we're setting up the mapping for the integration to sync to Bloomerang. Now, one item to note before we move forward. Most organizations that use PayPal donation buttons allow donors the option to set up a recurring donation. If you provide this option, the successful sale trigger for PayPal will fire for each installment of the recurring donation. The standard sync we're going to demo today will only create a donation record on the constituents timeline. It's not going to create a recurring donation record. So it's going to create a new donation every time the recurring charge is processed in PayPal, and it'll show up as a general donation on the timeline in Bloomerang. It won't show or differentiate that it's a recurring donation payment. There won't be a corresponding recurring donation schedule in Bloomerang. So once we have our sample data, we can move forward with creating our Bloomerang actions. So we're going to click the little, or it's actually going to give us the option right here to create a first action, but you can also click the blue plus sign to add a new action. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find or create the constituent in Bloomerang for the donor. So we're going to open up our first action and we're going to search for Bloomerang. There's Bloomerang. And then our action event is we want to start by finding the constituent. So I'm going to use the find constituent search. I select my Bloomerang account. Now, the first thing when we are trying to find a constituent is we have to identify whether we're looking for individuals or organizations. Now, most of the time coming from PayPal, your donors are going to be individuals. So we're going to choose that we're looking for an individual constituent type. Then from our PayPal successful sale, you can see it provides me with all of these different fields of data that I could pull in to map to the different fields we need to find a constituent. So I'm going to map the first name, I'm going to map the last name, and then I'm going to map the email. And I can also add, I think we also have phone in here. Phone, there we go. Now, PayPal donation buttons provide you with the option, or provide the donor with the option whether to share their mailing address or not. So if the donors are providing mailing address fairly consistently, you could also map in the address details here as well. So we could map in the street address. The more contact information fields you provide, the smarter the search for the existing constituent in Bloomerang will be. At a minimum, you need first name, last name, and one piece of contact information to be able to search to try and find an existing constituent. Now we're going to leave these two options for including the constituent's cumulative giving history and household information blank because we don't need to pull that information into any subsequent steps. But we will check this box that says create Bloomerang constituent if one was not found. So if our search using name and at least one piece of contact information does not match to an existing constituent in Bloomerang, we can then have the automation create a new account. So this is going to cut down on the amount of time that's spent doing manual data entry because it's going to go ahead and take care of that for us. So same as we did above for the search steps, I'm going to map in my name, first name, last name. Now I don't need to map anything to informal name, formal name, envelope name, and recognition name because Bloomerang will auto-generate these using my first and last name that I've mapped above. Then I can come down and let's say I don't collect address information for donors. We just get a phone and an email. I can come down to the primary email and primary phone fields and we have to select an email type. Most donors are going to provide their home email, so we'll default it to home and map the email address to primary email. And then phone, most people nowadays provide their mobile phone. So we're going to set a phone type of mobile and map the phone number from the PayPal's record. Now, the next thing that we're going to do once we've mapped the information, now you may have other custom fields in Boomerang you'd want to code as well. You could go ahead and code those. So if you have a field where you're coding them as a donor or another type of attribute, you can go ahead and code that in these custom fields as well. So I'm going to click continue at the bottom, and then it's going to give me the option to test my finder create constituent action. And we do need to test it because it's going to return some information on the account that was either found or created in Bloomerang. And we'll need that in a subsequent step. So I'm going to go ahead and click test and review at the bottom. And you'll see it's going to test. And it's going to tell me that a constituent was sent to Bloomerang right now. And this likely created a new constituent. This one was actually created a couple days ago by me when I was doing other testing. So it actually matched to an existing constituent in this case. But if it didn't match to an existing one, it would have created one. So now that we have successfully set up our finder create constituent step, the next step that we would normally need to do is add the step to create the donation in Bloomerang. However, this is from experience, but this is something that you'll realize as you start building your own automations. If we look in the PayPal data that sends for a donation, the date of the donation comes through with a timestamp. So it comes through in what I'd call like a non-user-friendly format. So you can see it comes through in a format that doesn't match how dates like to be entered in Bloomerang. And every application has its own language, so to speak. Bloomerang likes to accept dates as year, month, day. So we need to convert the date from the transaction to the format that's going to be accepted when we want to create the donation in Bloomerang. So I'm going to come down to my finder create, right below my finder create constituent step, click the plus sign, and I'm going to use an app that's called Formatter by Zapier. The formatter step provides us with a lot of options for formatting data in a lot of different ways. So we can reformat text, numbers, utilities provide some interesting things that we're going to talk about here in a minute for dynamic coding. But what we want to use is the date time converter here. I'm going to select a transform type of format because we simply want to change the format of the date or time. We don't want to add or subtract time. We just want to reformat it. Now the input is where I'm going to put the date that comes through from PayPal. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to select our payment date from PayPal. And then we get to choose the format that we want to convert it to. So we're going to say, okay, I want to convert it. And it gives us a lot of options here. We want to convert it to year, month, day to align with how Bloomerang likes to accept dates. So go ahead and click that. And similar as the step before, we want to test this. So now we're going to come in here and it's going to give us the option to test our step. So we're going to test and review. And you'll see that it reformatted the date from the dummy payload that PayPal provided, which is quite a few years ago. But you can see it reformatted the date so that it will be accepted by Bloomerang's end of the system or end of the automation. So now that we've found or created our constituent and we've reformatted, and we can rename this step so it's a little bit clearer. So I just click the little 3 dots and click rename. We can say convert payment date to year, month, day. Okay. Now we can click the plus sign again, and this is where we're going to do another Bloomerang step to create the donation. So I'm just going to click create donation as my action event. Click continue. Select my linked Bloomerang account in Zapier. Click continue again. So now we go ahead and map how we want the donation to be set up. Now, the first thing you'll need to do is identify which constituent the donation should be added to. So this is where the data that's returned by our Finder, Create, Constituent, and Bloomerang step comes into play. Because if you click this, what it's going to do is it's going to provide a drop down of a list of every account that's in your database. And if you were to select one of these, it would essentially hard code that every donation that comes through gets assigned to that single person's account. Now, that's not what we want to do. Instead, we want to set up custom mapping and map from the Finder, Create, Constituent, and Bloomerang step. We're going to search and we are going to find this field that's called ID. So the ID in Bloomerang is similar to an account number in the sense that it is a completely unique number for each constituent in your database, but it is an ID number that's used exclusively for automations, either using the Zapier app or the Bloomerang API. So we don't want to use the account number, we want to use this ID field right here. For the date, this is where we map in the date, not from the successful sale on PayPal, but we want our converted date. So I can just select our formatter step here and select the output that is the pretty date that aligns with how Bloomerang wants to accept dates. The method we're going to set as credit card. Now, this isn't going to process any credit cards. That was already accomplished in PayPal. This is simply identifying that the payment was made via credit card. We'll assign our amount. So it's going to be the amount of our donation here from PayPal. PayPal calls that MC gross, is what they call the amount for a transaction. And then in this sample one we're going to do right now, we are going to do what's called hard coding. So we are going to say that every donation that comes from PayPal into Bloomerang, we are going to code it with the same fund campaign and approach. So we're going to choose our unrestricted fund, our annual campaign, and our appeal is going to be online donation. Okay. Now, if we wanted to, we could set our acknowledgement status. So if PayPal is set out or set up to send out acknowledgements or e-receipts for donations, we could flag these transactions that they've been acknowledged, so they drop out of any acknowledgement templates that you have in Boomerang. If you leave it blank, it's going to default that it still needs to be acknowledged. We could map a note field from the Boomerang, or sorry, from the PayPal step if we wanted to. Now, the only other fields here that I recommend mapping to are two custom fields that we like to set up for any type of payment processor that you're integrating with Bloomerang. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here. Is we have a transaction source, which is a pick one, and a transaction ID that's a text field. So for transaction source, this is where we would list where the data is coming in from. So if we ever needed to pull a report in Bloomerang to show all donations created from PayPal, we could do that. And transaction ID is where we're going to map the ID for the transaction from PayPal. So we're going to go ahead and set our source to PayPal and pull in our transaction ID from PayPal. Now, normally in these Bloomerang Academy webinars, I would do a live donation from PayPal and have you see how quickly it flows through to Bloomerang. However, payment processors vary on how quickly they process data. And so occasionally for a successful sale, it may take a couple of minutes to go through. And also for privacy purposes, we don't want to be entering a credit card live on a webinar that's also going to be recorded. So instead, what I'm going to show you is a donation that I entered in PayPal yesterday, and then how it showed up in Bloomerang. So right here in PayPal, you can see that I have a transaction. Here's my transaction ID number. It was a $1 donation. So you can see all the details here for that PayPal donation. If we flip over to Bloomerang, this is the constituent, and I'll zoom in here so it's a little bit bigger. This is the constituent that the donation was written to here in Bloomerang. And you can see it has the hard-coded fund, campaign, and approach that we just identified. You can see it coded our fund, campaign, and our approach, our method of credit card. And then down in the transaction details, it coded our source and our transaction ID. Now, I know this can be a lot to take in. Setting up an automation can feel overwhelming at first, but the beautiful thing of an automation is that once it's set up, it runs in the background and you don't have to think about entering those donations from PayPal into Bloomerang. So we're at kind of a logical breaking point right here, and I can see that there's quite a few questions in the queue. So Diana, let's take a minute and talk through some questions before we move on to the next piece of the demonstration that we wanted to show.
Thanks, Jessie. That was a lot of information already. We do have questions around, is it only donations? Can we specify if it's going to be a recurring donation or if it can be used with a recurring donation?
Yeah, so yes, so as I mentioned, PayPal allows the option that you can have donors set up a recurring donation. There typically is information that comes through, or depending on how it's set up, that can come through from PayPal identifying that it's recurring. And oftentimes we will have organizations code that in a custom field. So even though it's creating a donation record on a Constituent and Bloomerang, we can code it saying that this is actually a recurring payment processed through PayPal, so that you can see, okay, these are, recurring donations that we want to be able to, identify they're recurring or treat as recurring.
Awesome. And does Zapier integrate with the nonprofit or fee-free side of PayPal?
So I believe that Zapier connects with PayPal kind of across the board. We haven't run into any issues connecting PayPal with Zapier for nonprofits, and all the PayPal automations that we've done have been for nonprofits. So fairly confident that yes, it would integrate with the nonprofit free side of PayPal, as it doesn't differentiate or identify what type of PayPal account you need to have in order to automate through Zapier.
Awesome. And can you pick what type of transactions from PayPal get pushed to Bloomerang?
Yes. So typically using filters. So Zapier has an option that we can filter, and I'll show an example of that here real quick. So let's say, for example, we wanted to filter and only allow certain types of transactions from PayPal to sync through. Filter by Zapier is a free app to use in Zapier that allows us to set up logic to say if, let's say, if the item name exactly matches, XYZ, we want the workflow to continue, or maybe if it doesn't match this, we only want it to continue. So filters allow us a way to really control what types of transactions are filtering from PayPal to Bloomerang. So yes, we do have that control to filter in or out transactions that you do or do not want to go to Bloomerang.
Awesome. Last question for the moment. Is the sync going to show the total amount donated before the fee is charged by PayPal?
Yes. So the sync will show the amount that the donor donated, which may or may not include fees. And the reason why is that donate buttons for PayPal allow the donor often to select the option. And I believe this is a setting you can set up where they choose to cover the fees. So it's going to show the gross amount that was charged to the constituent. So if they choose to cover the fees, it'll be the donation amount plus the fee. If they do not choose to cover fees, it would be just the donation amount, and it wouldn't show the amount that's netted out or paid by your organization for fees. It would reflect the amount that the donor actually paid.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessie.
Yeah. Do we have any more, or do we want to keep going, Diana?
I think let's keep going for now, and we have more time for questions later.
Awesome. So the workflow that we showed right there was when we hard-coded the fund, campaign, and appeal, meaning that every successful sale on PayPal is coded with the same fund, campaign, and appeal in Bloomerang. Now, that may work for many organizations. However, we also encounter a lot of organizations that collect donations via PayPal for many purposes. So many organizations that use PayPal donation buttons use the feature where they can identify different programs, or what PayPal calls programs, that allows the donor to select how they want their funds to be used. So this can be a really easy way to provide donors with greater control over the impact of their donation. So for an example of what that looks like, here's a sample donation button, and there's a drop-down field where they can choose how they want their funds to be directed, where it's needed most, to a capital campaign. Maybe your organization has sponsorships of some type, whether it's a child or a student sponsorship or an event sponsorship, perhaps it's membership. You can see kind of the broad spectrum of how this field could be used, but it allows us to do some dynamic coding and code the fund, campaign, and or appeal differently based on the donor selection in this field. So I want to show you real quick how you can set up a donation button with this feature in PayPal. So if this is something you're doing currently, but don't have this feature, you can enable it. Or if you plan to start using PayPal donation buttons, this will give you some insight into how to set that up. So we're going to go to activity in PayPal, or sorry, pay and get paid. Oh, come on. Oops. I think my screen froze on me there. Uh-oh, logged me out real quick. Get my login. Okay. Okay, so once you log into PayPal, you're going to click Pay and Get Paid, and then select Donations down here under Accept Payments. Now you can see we already have a button set up. If you hadn't set one up yet, you could click Custom Donate Experience. But I'm just going to click Manage to show you where this setting is on an existing button. So in Manage, I'm going to click Edit Donate Button, and it's going to take me to the edit screen. Now this 4-step process is the same whether you're setting up a new button or you're editing an existing one. So we want to go to step 2. So I'm going to click Continue to go to step 2. And then down here, it gives us the option to let your donors choose specific programs for their donation. So we can say no. If we don't want to give them the option, we want to code everything the same. Or we can say yes and list the names of the programs or the different purposes that we'd like them to be able to select between. So for some organizations, I'll see there be like holiday related ones. So maybe there's like Thanksgiving donation or the holidays or Easter. So again, you can identify those however aligns with your organization and the different purposes you'd like the donor to be able to select from. And then we just would follow through the rest of the steps in terms of setting up our buttons. And again, this list can change over time as needed. So maybe, again, if you have any seasonal or holiday ones, you may be adding those during that time and then removing them when that period is over. Maybe there's a specific appeal or a fundraising campaign you have going on. Same thing, you could add that to the list of programs and then remove it really easily by just clicking remove when it's no longer needed. So now that we've made our PayPal donation button more dynamic, we also need to make the coding on the donation in Boomerang more dynamic. So by adding lookup steps and the standard sync we just demoed, we can dynamically code the fund, campaign, or appeal on the donation in Bloomerang. So for this demo today, we're going to add lookup steps for the fund and campaign only, but you could do this for appeals as well, but we're just going to leave appeal hard-coded as online donation. So we're going to hop back over to Zapier. We're going to find our demo workflow that we had here. I'm going to remove that initial filter. And what we're going to do is after we converted the date, we're going to add here another formatter step. So this is the same app that we used to convert the date, but we're going to use a different action. Instead of doing a date time format, we're going to use utilities, which gives us the option to do a lookup table. So I'm going to click continue. I'm going to click lookup table. There we go. And this is where it's going to give me the lookup key, which is going to be the input from PayPal. Now, those programs on the donate button come through what's called the item number in PayPal. So I would select the item number. Now, again, this is a dummy payload coming through from PayPal because we haven't submitted any donations since we hooked up our instant payment notification. But the item number would reflect that program that is on our donation button. So what we would do is we would have our item number values. So again, for that example that I showed on our button, you know, where it's needed most, we had our capital campaign. And then we had our student sponsorships. So we add the values on the left that are those programs or purposes we identified in PayPal. And on the right, we're going to put the corresponding Bloomerang fund. So this first step is going to be convert PayPal item purpose to our Bloomerang fund. So let's say our where it's needed most is actually our unrestricted fund. Our capital campaign, in our Sidekick sandbox, we call this our building fund. And then let's say student sponsorships go to a temporarily restricted fund. We can also set a fallback value. So if the donor doesn't make a selection on that donate button, it'll default to that value. So maybe that's unrestricted. Or if you forgot to add your new purpose or program to this lookup table, it'll default to this as well. So you can set a default of one of your existing funds, or some organizations I'll see create a fund that's called default. So that it's a way to set up a really easy data quality report in Bloomerang, have it scheduled to deliver to you weekly if you have any donations in Bloomerang that get coded with that default value that you have. So once we would set up our lookup table, we would click test and review, and it would spit out the response of what that corresponding fund was for the purpose or program that was selected on our donate button. And the only change we would have to make in the mapping of our create donation is similar to how we did for our date, where we pulled the date from that formatter step. The same thing we would do for fund. Instead of hard coding it as unrestricted, we would choose custom. And then we would choose the output from that conversion step where it's converting the PayPal item number purpose to the Bloomerang fund. So we just would choose our return from that. And then we would do the same thing for campaign. So we would create another formatter step and follow the same process to create one for a campaign. And the output from that campaign lookup would go to the campaign field here on the donation. So right here, we would have another step right below step 4, where it's convert PayPal item purpose to Bloomerang fund. We would have one, so it'd be a step 5 that would say convert PayPal item purpose to Bloomerang campaign, and we would take the output from that one and map it to campaign. So this would allow us to really dynamically code the fund and the campaign. Again, you could do this for appeal as well, so that you are not having to go in and manually adjust or modify those donations once they're entered in Bloomerang. So the workflow that we've demoed today, while it may seem fairly overwhelming, is actually a very standard PayPal sync. This is really designed to support a sync of donations made from a PayPal donation button. However, PayPal is often connected to other apps such as online forms, e-commerce stores, fundraising platforms, the list goes on. Really, it can be used for a variety of purposes. And so this workflow that we've showcased today is really the base of any PayPal sync, but it can be expanded to support more advanced use cases, such as if you need line item support for multi-item purchases or payments. If you need to trigger multiple workflows from a single PayPal donation to accommodate different mapping rules for different types of transactions. If you need to filter out donations from another platform, like let's say Fundraise Up, when there's already a native integration with Bloomerang that you're using. And then another use case that I think kind of got brought up in a question here, or I saw it filtering through the chat at one point, was if you want to have different workflows set up for different donation buttons, instead of setting that global notification URL in the instant payment notifications, if you wanted to set that at the button level, you would need to set up then multiple workflows in Zapier, probably one workflow per button. So again, another advanced use case, but when it comes to these advanced use cases, what I really want to reinforce is that whatever your use case is, we can typically solve for it. So we've done standard syncs like the ones we've demoed today, and we've also done advanced use cases that match every single one of these ones listed up here, as well as accommodating for notification URLs on specific PayPal buttons and not others. So we really can do a lot to adjust that standard sync that we showcased today to match your organization's use case. So as we mentioned earlier, the beauty of Zapier is that it's not a one size fits all. We can really adjust that to meet your organization's needs, your use case, and how you need to code data in Bloomerang. So before we stop and take some more questions and kind of wrap up today's webinar, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on the power of Bloomerang integrations with Zapier. So we believe that Bloomerang is your central system and that integrations supplement your Bloomerang database. Data entry, reporting, and automation should start from the lens that Bloomerang is core to your donor management and fundraising technology. It's the hub at the center, or the spoke at the center of a wheel. PayPal and Zapier simply supplement and extend the power of Bloomerang. They don't replace it. So by syncing donations made through PayPal to Bloomerang, you can save time, resources, energy, sanity, all of the above, depending on if you're in a big donation season or you have a big appeal going out, really can help you, ensure consistency in Bloomerang, again, cut down on the amount of time it takes to see those donations in your system. Essentially, we want to empower you to spend less time performing data entry so you have more time focusing on your mission and cultivating donors. So the next step would truly be getting started. As we walk through today, you would sign up for Zapier. It offers a free trial and free up to certain limits, and nonprofits do get a discount. Now, with that being said, PayPal is considered a premium app in Zapier, meaning that you have to have the lowest paid, you need to have a paid plan in Zapier, but it can be the lowest paid plan in order to get started with syncing donations. You'll need to connect your Bloomerang and PayPal accounts to Zapier. You can set up the standard PayPal sync, turn it on, and watch as the data syncs from PayPal to Bloomerang. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this webinar today. As Diana mentioned, my name is Jessie Gilchrist. My email is listed here, and my door is truly always open. We covered a lot of content today, and this is one of the more advanced automation concepts. And so if it feels overwhelming, you are not alone. My door is open. Let me know if you have questions. Now, if you'd like to work with a consultant to set up a PayPal workflow, develop a custom PayPal workflow, or integrate any other apps the organization is using with Bloomerang or even outside of Bloomerang, please don't hesitate to reach out. At Psychic Solutions, we not only are Bloomerang automation specialists, we also are Zapier certified experts and can help you automate most any system, whether it is connected to Bloomerang or not. So we really are here to help, here to support you, and want to help organizations make the most of not only their Bloomerang system, but also streamline that automation across apps that you're using. So I'm going to hand it off to Diana for a quick poll before we open up for more questions.
Thank you so much, Jessie. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now. And feel free to answer the poll as we're going through questions. We have a question here. Is there a way for these auto-generated donations and new constituents to require confirmation steps? So instead of just making them into Bloomerang right away before they are official, the administrator would be alerted and be able to review them before they get pushed to Bloomerang.
Yes, so there is a way. So typically what we would do is we would set up what we call a clearinghouse or a review queue in a tool like Google Sheets. And so all of the data from the donation, including the donor's information and the donation information, could write to a Google Sheet. And then by simply entering send or putting an X, whatever you prefer, into a specific cell in that Google Sheet would send it on to Bloomerang at that point. So absolutely, yes, we can create a review queue, clearinghouse, whatever you want to call it, for an administrator to be able to review the data, adjust it as needed, or even manually choose which donations and constituents sync to Bloomerang and which do not.
Awesome, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about checking if a constituent is already in Bloomerang versus creating, and what the matching characteristics are, what the matching criteria are, and if there's any way you can control what those matches, how those matches are made?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the matching criteria actually mirrors how the duplicate match in Bloomerang works. So it matches on name and at least one piece of contact information. So if you were to go into, let me swipe over here. If you were to go to the Bloomerang, I'm just going to the Bloomerang knowledge base and duplicates. And I believe it lists out the criteria that it uses. Yeah, so it'll match in a similar manner to how the duplicate matches. So to answer the question of are you able to control how the match is working? No, that is actually identified by the Bloomerang API. However, the control you can have is to identify what piece of contact information you want to use for that search. So perhaps you want to use name and email. Maybe you want to use name and address only. Maybe you want to provide the full suite of contact information. Essentially, your control over how the match is working comes down to which piece or pieces of contact information not only are available, but are matched to that fine step to identify if it's there. Now, there is one alternative. This likely would not necessarily apply to PayPal, but could apply to other applications you're using, which is that if there are syncs that can be set up to sync the constituent's account number in Bloomerang to another app that you're using. And if that account number existed in that other app, we can do a custom action that will match exactly that account every time using that account number. Now, again, that's a more advanced use case, but if you're using another type of fundraising platform or something like that, where you're also tracking the Bloomerang account number there, we can sync data both directions from Bloomerang. So it's not just syncing data into Bloomerang like we showcased in our PayPal workflow. If you also have a sync that's syncing data from PayPal out to another application, we can use the account number as essentially like a perfect match every time to match back to that same account.
Awesome. And can you do a similar process with the clearinghouse for PayPal to Bloomerang to QuickBooks, or PayPal to QuickBooks directly?
Yeah, so you absolutely could. The piece with the PayPal, the Bloomerang to QuickBooks would be whether you're using one QuickBooks Desktop versus QuickBooks Online. So QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online native integrations with Bloomerang are different. And so it'd be identifying which one of those you're using. But the native integrations with those tools that Bloomerang has, there's no kind of middle step between those. For QuickBooks Online, if you wanted to have that kind of a middle step between Bloomerang and QuickBooks Online, you could use Zapier to do a similar process where it has a holding queue before it goes to QuickBooks Online. So you would use Zapier instead of the native QuickBooks Online integration. But yes, so there are options, again, for data coming into Bloomerang or from Bloomerang to another app to have that clearinghouse feel or clearinghouse step to provide greater administrative control.
Great. When the donations from PayPal are pushed from PayPal to Bloomerang, is there an indicator in Bloomerang that they came from PayPal that could easily be reported on?
Yeah, so that is where I recommended creating that transaction source field. So making that a pick one field, and you can code that on that create donation step in Zapier, because that will allow you to then really easily pull a report. So I'll show you here in our sandbox what that would look like. You would just create a new transaction report, and using that transaction source, oops, if I can spell transaction, there we go. You'd select PayPal, and it would pull in any donations that have that transaction source of PayPal coded to it. So that is the best way to be able to ensure that you can pull really simple reports of donations that came in from PayPal or another source that you're syncing into Bloomerang. Again, another fundraising platform. Maybe you're using Eventbrite for event registration and you have paid events. Similar thing, you could code them with a source of Eventbrite or whatever other fundraising platform you're using.
Wonderful. And to add to that as well, since you're running this report in Bloomerang, you can do your usual process of scheduling this report to go to your inbox or to someone's inbox if you need. Wonderful. In terms of managing the Zapier account, do you recommend using a generic user account like donations@company.org so that the Zapier account is not tied to a specific Bloomerang user?
Yes. So that's a great question. It's one that we really kind of encourage as best practice. There's two pieces to this. One is to create in your Bloomerang, whoops, wrong slide, in your Bloomerang database to create a user that is like a generic one. So most organizations that I work with call it, Zapier or something like that, but they create a user that's tied to a generic company email, but they create an admin user in Bloomerang for that so that they can use that to link Bloomerang to Zapier. Because if you were to delete the user in Bloomerang that is connected to Zapier, when we did that My Apps setup, if that person's user was deleted, the connection to Bloomerang would be lost and your integration would stop running. So setting up a generic user in Bloomerang, that's kind of an organization user, is step one. And then step two is, yes, for your Zapier account itself, setting up the Zapier account, I would likely recommend the same email that is used for that generic user. But the email address is specific to, it's essentially one email address per Zapier account, unless you get up to like an enterprise level or use their Teams feature, which most nonprofits don't need. And so you would also want to have that be kind of a generic organization email address so that in the event of staff turnover, you're not having to try and get in with someone's email address that is no longer with your organization.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jessie. That was a lot of great information. I know we still have a couple of unanswered questions, but we'll make sure to follow up via email. Also, everyone is going to receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides and any notes that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us and spending an hour of your day with us. We know this is a lot to think about, whether or not you're already using PayPal, but we're so excited with what you all can do with Bloomerang and any of the 3,000 apps out there that Zapier is connected with. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. And if you had additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much again, Jessie. Thank you everyone for being here. We hope you have a great rest of your day and we see you in another Academy class soon. Bye.